Hey everybody, this is Catherine Spires, host of Smartmouth, the podcast you are now listening to. First of all, some business. Smartmouth does have a Patreon, which is at patreon.com/smartmouthpodcast. Thank you to Patrick Vader for contributing. You are very much appreciated. Friends, are you familiar with quark? It's a dairy product that's super popular in Europe and Central Asia, and though it's technically a soft cheese, it more closely resembles a really thick yogurt. You can eat it plain. I think it makes a great breakfast, maybe mixed with a little fruit. It's super filling because it has up to 24 grams of protein in every 8 ounces. And it does not separate when it gets hot, so you can use it in cooking and baking too. A brand called Wunder is bringing quark to the US, so if you would like to try it, go to wundercreamery.com and enter code SMARTMOUTH for 15% off on your first order. That's wundercreamery.com, use code SMARTMOUTH. Also, please do check out my sister show, Gayest Episode Ever. You can find episodes at gayestepisodeever.com, and I will also have a link to that in my show notes. So I can tell by a couple of my iTunes reviews that some people are startled that I have a point of view. So to make it clear, I am filthy progressive. And this episode, this entire show, but this episode in particular, is pro-socialism, but anti-communism. And there is a difference, though as Americans we all have different definitions of these two structures, as you will hear in this episode. I actually asked people on Twitter how they define socialism, and answers ranged from collectivism to dignity to state ownership to Danish pastries. So, we all make it up as we go along. My guest for this episode is my friend Jeremy Bowditch, who is running for his neighborhood council as a democratic socialist. He's also a lover of expensive wines, because people can be both. So please enjoy the propaganda. So Jeremy, you are running for neighborhood council in Echo Park, Los Angeles, as a democratic socialist, correct?
Yes. It's such a wide open system that they don't even really have like a set thing for your party, but we are backed by Democratic Socialists of America, LA chapter. And we are not quiet about our desire to end capitalism if someone asks, but mostly we're about, hey, get that speed bump you always wanted.
When you say we, are you already a senator or are you talking about other people? Is this a royal we?
I'm also running with a slate of progressive candidates, other socialists in the neighborhood. So I'd say it's about 6 of us. And yeah, we're running as a group.
Running as a group. That is like, this is what people are afraid of, Jeremy. Running as a group.
And they should be. I think that the George Floyd protests nationally kind of got people into the idea of protest again, like, oh, this could do something. Then Nithya Raman ran a successful progressive campaign for city council in LA and won. We also voted out Jackie Lacey and replaced her with a progressive DA. And so Black Lives Matter and just the protest gang in LA in general is like, we're coming off a couple wins right now. What else can we do? And a lot of kind of lefty organization grassroots groups have noticed that the neighborhood council system is wide open, right? We're talking about elections that are won with 8 votes, 15 votes, 25 votes, openings. Some councils, half of them are empty, right? And so, yeah, why not walk on? And they'd be like, oh, I'm glad you asked. I don't think there should be police. You know what I mean? Like, why not?
Okay, I like that. Did you read the article in the LA Times this week about how berets are back in style?
I did not. What is going on there?
He says that it's like, it was this guy, Dave Schilling, who wrote it, and he was like, it's funny because it's kind of like fancy artist type fashion to wear a beret, but it's also revolutionary fashion to wear a beret. And he thinks that's more what's influencing it right now.
Ooh, we're talking about like Black Panther Party fashions?
Yes.
Che Guevara, Fidel Castro fashions? Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't realize that there was an LA-based organization called the Brown Berets, which were then called Chicano revolutionaries. Yeah.
I'm down. I love anything that makes a NIMBY or a fan of law enforcement to go, oh no, this sounds terrible to me. Like, sign me up for whatever that is. Don't even need to read it. Just, I'll take 2.
I love that. What was that movie called about Fred Hampton? Judas and the Black Messiah? Is that it?
Yes.
I haven't seen it because I tend to protest inconsequential things, but I don't like that they cast grown men in the 2 starring roles when a very important factor of this all was that they were teenagers.
Yeah, like 19,
yes.
17, 18 years old. I think that I noticed that because you keep reading it and reading it and reading it. And I think that if they would have done casting closer to, say, like what Judd Apatow did with Freaks and Geeks, where he took actual children and put them in the role. So like you're watching, you're like, wait, these are kids talking about funny stuff. It would be very different because the movie does feel like grown ass men doing grown ass men things when really it's like high schoolers, right? Like
yes.
18-year-olds, 19-year-olds.
And I think that's so important both for showing what an actual genius Fred Hampton was and why the Judas maybe deserves a little bit more empathy because he was straight up 17 when they recruited him.
Yeah, that actually is a good point. I did see the movie and it does do a good job of not judging the Judas character. This is a real guy, but just kind of like laying out the circumstances, you know what I mean? And how he kind of got caught up and the way they ended, this is not a spoiler, but that guy killed himself.
Yep.
And he killed himself like a week or two. He did a documentary, did an interview. And in the interview, he's like, well, I regret nothing. I did everything, I wasn't played or anything like that. I was acting on my own. And then they aired the interview and he killed himself within the week.
Yeah.
And like that kind of tells you what's going on there. Right. And so it's like a complex thing that's happening. And the movie does a good job of bringing you like that thriller excitement, and they're like, oh, this man was dangerous. But to your point, the idea that these were kids who just talked to other kids and that those kids organizing was so scary that the federal government took a break from killing Vietnamese people and was like, we have to do one back home. His name's Fred. we got to get him. Like that is insanity to me, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this man, his words, right, were so influential and so, I don't know, threatening, I guess, that he had to be neutralized.
So threatening that he was getting white rednecks on his side. The government couldn't handle that. That was too much.
Yeah, right?
He's too good.
The pores were talking to each other. Quick. Red alert. They figured it out.
So I think that something that has to be talked about when we talk about socialism is that I'm going to say that maybe in America, it essentially doesn't have a meaning. And I say that because I feel like everyone makes up their own definition of socialism. There've been all these like polls and surveys done by Gallup and all the other companies. Only 29% of Americans consider socialism compatible with American values, yet 50% believe socialism is, quote, a way to make things fairer for working people. So what's going on there? And then opinions about socialism. Last year, they found that only 6% of Democrats and independents have negative feelings about socialism, but 76% of Republicans have negative feelings about socialism. It's split almost evenly between who thinks socialism would be a bad thing and a good thing. So these numbers all speak to our different thoughts about it, but also that we have no idea what we're talking about.
Definitely.
So I think it's really funny that like even Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, it really hedges its bets. It has 3 different definitions of socialism. The first one being any of various economic and political theories.
Okay. That whole section of the store, right? Right from the front, all these aisles, socialism.
Yeah. And then it says like advocating collective ownership and administration of the means of production, a system of society or group living in which there's no private property, a system or condition of society in which the means of productions are owned and controlled by the state, or a stage of society in Marxist theory transitional between capitalism and communism. Okay, so that's the dictionary saying it's whatever you want it to be. What do you think it is?
I think that the Democratic Socialists have done a good job of kind of, in a really quick way, not rebranding, but using American values to explain socialism. And the way they do it is, we believe in democracy, not only for society, right? What does that mean? That means that everyone gets together and says, what do we want to happen in society? We all raise our hands. Okay, that's what we're doing. But also for the economy, democracy, right? So everyone gets in the room. Hey, America made us $60 trillion last year. What should we do with it? Oh, everyone raised their hand. Okay, that's what we're doing. That with both of those moves, that's it, right? And if you unpack what does it mean if we got to vote or all had a say in the economy, you poll Americans, what do they want? They want food in babies' mouths. They want roofs over their heads, right? They want basic living that everyone should be entitled to. And they want that, but how to get it? That's when you get this like political, rah! And I think by framing it as democratic socialism, it's like, we're not out. I mean, we are out to like seize the means of production, right? End capitalism. There is no more private industry. It's all worker co-ops, right? Like you vote on your boss's salary. That we'd love that to be everything. Strong unions. But really what we're talking about is, if we organized our economy through democracy, right? You know what I mean? Instead of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and like one other person, right? Essentially setting the agenda for American political thought with huge piles of money. What if we as a group could vote on how all this money works, where it went, da, da, da. And if I think that happened, Americans would vote to help themselves out and not to enrich themselves, right? Not to like, we don't want to work anymore. I think it'd just be, hey, if you get sick, you shouldn't die or go bankrupt. If you lose your job, you shouldn't have to sleep in the rain. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about like raising the floor, right? Like the worst thing that could happen to you in America, the absolute worst thing that could happen to you in America, instead of starving to death on the street, we'd like it to be like, I don't know, there's nothing good on TV in my government housing and all I have to eat are these government meals. Like that should be the floor instead of, oh, this man died on the streets of Los Angeles because he didn't have enough money. And in this society, if you don't have $1, you are going to die. Like that is what? You know, we have 7 people dying a day on the streets of LA who are unhoused. And also California by itself is like the 7th or 6th biggest economy on the planet. Like I just don't. And when you frame that to people are like, oh, well, that's unacceptable. You know, it's like the big things people agree on. But then once you start, okay, so I'm going to give $1 to this homeless man, then people start pulling their hair out, raising, he didn't earn it. Don't tread on me. And so that's kind of the bridge we're trying to set up.
So in Marx's works, he was talking about how communism is the end goal, but socialism is on the path there, but socialism doesn't go far enough. I'm like, hey, Marx, I actually think socialism does go far enough. Like, I don't need full communism.
and I think the problem with, full communism, full anything really is like, we're trusting that small group of people is going to keep acting altruistically forever, even though power has been centralized under their hand. That's never going to happen, right? So like, let's keep it democratic, right? Let's just keep every now and then all 340 million people are like, hey, do we still think that hungry people should eat? Yes. Great. We're going to keep doing that. Like, let's keep it over there. And I really do believe in just our basic human decency and desire for dignity. And that if given a choice, you know what I mean? If like there's an American pie and we're slicing it up, I think 9 out of 10 Americans would be like, yes, hungry people should get some food.
Yeah.
You know what? Like, let's just do it. Like, I'm not saying steak. I'm not saying lobster. They don't need to be, but they starving to death in my country. No, I don't want to see it. And so that's trying to lean into that angle and less in the, we're coming for your oil supply. We are. But, we want to stick to feeding people and all those like big ticket items that make every family feel great.
Yeah. And okay, so I didn't know this, but Democratic National Convention last year was in Milwaukee, and the Republicans used that as a mocking point because Milwaukee has had 3 different socialist mayors in its history. None since 1960. The last one retired in 1960. But the Republicans were like, oh, haha, socialist Milwaukee, of course. But did you know that before 1960, Milwaukee in particular was known for its public health, its advanced sewage system, its smart budgeting, and the fact that there weren't that many corrupt people in government? And this is what the governor or the mayor who served 3 terms, Emil Seidel, he said, yes, we wanted sewers in the workers' houses, But we wanted much, so very much more than sewers. We wanted our workers to have pure air. We wanted them to have sunshine. We wanted planned homes. We wanted living wages. We wanted recreation for young and old. We wanted vocational education. We wanted a chance for every human being to be strong and live a life of happiness. Here's the thing, though. I know a lot of people are hearing that and going, fucking hippie.
We have this like strange, and I was talking to someone, I think personally, I'm not a scientist or an academic, but I think it comes from the Puritans, right? This idea of if you don't work, you don't eat. This like biblical, Judeo-Christian, kind of uniquely American, rugged individualism idea of if you have something, it's because you deserve it, number one. And number two, you worked hard. Therefore, people who have the most deserve it more than anyone else and worked harder than everyone else. So if we keep going by that logic, Jeff Bezos is the most deserving man in history, right? And he's also the hardest working man in history. That is offensive as an idea, right? Like it doesn't hold up, but like people still, and some French guy, I think this may be a misattributed quote, but he said that, the United States is a nation of temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we don't want to demand fairness or equity because we all think that, I'm going to step, tomorrow off the right curb and just step into some oil and I'm going to become a trillionaire overnight. And because of that, we're setting up the system for the like 6 people who are already there thinking, well, I could get there one day. And it is a fantasy, Yes,
we're extremely confused about that sort of thing. But socialism, under one definition of it, I suppose, but among the academics, under socialism, individual people can still own their own property.
Of course.
So, yeah, I feel like it's maybe not actually that different than what we technically have, where people can own their own property, but also you can get Social Security, which is extremely socialist.
All that 1930s New Deal stuff is socialism, and it's extremely popular. What Biden and the Democrats just passed, more socialism, extremely popular, right? So like every American, they means tested it, which is not that great, but every American making under 80K, whether they're an infant or a 75-year-old, is getting that $1,400 stimulus. And then every family is getting like $10,000 off their taxes for having kids. That's socialism, right? And so right now, socialism. GOP voted against it, every single one, but they're coming out being like, oh, hey, help's coming, and Congress did it. And they're like, sir, is this socialism? Well, did you see that ribs are back at Applebee's? Because, and it's like, sir, that's not the question. Wait, hold on, what was that? Right? Like, so like that's their problem now is like, what if people get a taste of the government working for them?
Yeah.
And that gets called socialism. Someone's like, you know what? My health is a little better. I think I like this socialism. Then what are they going to do,
So I didn't realize that this was on purpose, but conservatives really like that Americans don't know the difference between communism and socialism because communism is scary. And then they use communism and socialism interchangeably, so we don't know that they're different. And then ergo, we are afraid of socialism. And we have stereotypes in our heads about socialism. And a personal anecdote is that on OkCupid, OkCupid is the one that asks you a million questions. So in different sections, in one part, I think I'm a socialist. And in another part, I say, I recently started my own company. Can I tell you how many men have messaged me just to be disparaging to me and go, oh, so you're a socialist, but you started your own company? I think you're a little confused. People really think that in socialist countries, you are just standing in breadlines. I mean,
it's rhetorical, like, who's that dude? Joe Rogan podcast, YouTube, Crowder, gotcha, Tucker Carlson type intellects, flexing like, oh, what's that? You don't like capitalism and yet you use money for medicine? Like, what are you saying to me? Honestly, what are you saying to me? Are you crazy? Like, what are you saying to me? I think the main difference between like a democratic socialist country and like a straight up just raw capitalist country, like we're kind of trending towards now, is like if you make $1 billion in that democratic socialist country, that democracy is going to say, hey, we have some ideas about how to use that money and we're going to execute those ideas via taxes. What's good? And in this country, it's like, well, he earned that money, so whatever he wants to do with it sounds good to me. Dump stuff in the river. Why not? Like, what? 1950s, 50% of everything you made, if you were rich, went to the government, maybe more. right? And that's been going down, 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 down. So like when people remember the good old days when every man could work a job and come home to a chicken in his pot and like no one was without, do you know why that was? Right? U.S. government's handing out GI bills, like FHA loans, and just left and right, just money, 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 money. And America, the Great Society was built. Everyone loved it. And now we're all like, man, things are tough now. We're better then. Well, the only solution, I guess, is more unabridged raw dog capitalism. Like, well, let me just take it and hope things get better. Like that is, it's, yeah, I don't understand that at all, you know?
No, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And this thing about breadlines really sends people into a panic. And it's an idea that I think, you know, any pictures that could be taken out of the Soviet Union were of these breadlines often. So we think it's a foreign concept, which is kind of funny when you think about it, because the term breadline is actually not just an English word. It's an American English word because the breadline was invented in America.
No, I'm not surprised.
So there's actually, I just want to get out of the way first. There is another definition of breadline that's the poverty threshold. So the breadline is the minimum level of income deemed adequate in a given country. But for, you know, this is a food history podcast. We are talking about when people line up for food, specifically bread. Yes, a queue, indeed. Before we talk about how the United States invented the breadline, I want to talk about like when there's famine and how it is that I just want to touch on this really quickly and then we'll go back and forth a little bit. So a lot of people still believe that overpopulation causes famine. And it's interesting that this is still an idea that has some hold in society because in terms of academics, it's been disproven since at least the 1970s that it has anything to do with the number of people anywhere. This is just absolutely not what it is. There's usually multiple factors, but the more recent in history we get, it's usually bad policy, sometimes intentionally bad policy that causes large groups of people to starve to death. There's a political scientist named Alex DeWall. He calls it a ongoing political scandal because a famine is, quote, a catastrophic breakdown in government capacity or willingness to do what is known to be necessary to prevent famine. You know, in Russia, actually, people were hungry off and on. It wasn't that people were hungry during all of the USSR. It kind of depended on when policies got changed, when different men came into leadership. People writing about living in Russia, for instance, growing or being a teenager in the 1980s. I read this article where this woman said she remembered the empty grocery stores where once abundant bakery and dairy sections were now emptying, which I think indicates that, I mean, she said once abundant. So in the 70s, they had plenty, apparently, at least where she went. And then there's an organization called the Famine Early Warning Systems Network that says famines are not natural phenomena. They're catastrophic political failures. And I think having read about all these famines and where there were breadlines and people needing to be fed en masse is that I think that contemporary famine happens when the government leaders are afraid that the working class will shirk their duties or get something they didn't earn. This really, I think, is a through line of people of being like, well, they didn't work hard enough for it. Let them starve.
Right.
They don't say it that way.
Of course,
but I
of
think
course.
That's what they mean.
I think that's incredible. The idea that it's not a natural thing. It's like we know how to produce a lot of food, right? Like there's grain silos everywhere. Like don't tell me that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1,000 years right after like cultivation of land, 30,000 years after we started cultivating, that like we just don't know how to make enough. Stop it. You know what I mean? Stop it. Like there are like. Robin Hood, there's like 400-year-old stories about men with like castles full of grain and people starving outside. Like that is a trope that we are aware of for a reason, right?
Yes.
So like I'm 100% with that. There's so much that happens politically that we act like it's a natural force. Capitalism is one of them, right? All of these are systems created by people to organize themselves, right? Like none of this is like the rain, right? Or gravity or something where it's like, well, this is a natural law. Can't do anything about it. Like that is not what's happening here. This is just what we're doing because we want to.
Yes. Yeah, completely. So there had been a period of both peace and stability in Europe in the 1500s, but then in the 1590s, one of the worst famines in all of Europe hit. So what had happened basically is that as the very beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution started to kick up and people started working for other people, and cash money starts to be a concept instead of just trading with your neighbors for what you need. When you start having the cash money, that's when people become vulnerable to famine because the system becomes so convoluted.
Right.
So instead of we have our little plot of land and we go grow grain, but we also have a cow for dairy products and we got some fruit that comes up in the spring and fall, that sort of thing. Now it's like, I have to work to get the money to now go buy the things.
Yeah.
And this is capitalism.
Mm-hmm. It's I saw something that like broke down capitalism, some like lecture, and this guy was like, okay, so a man or a woman has, or a non-binary friend as well, has enough resources to get a bunch of wood, right? They go collect it, they have it, and they have this pile of wood. Now that pile of wood is a pile of wood. It's everywhere, nobody wants it, it's worthless. What are we gonna do with it? I need to make this into a chair. So they find someone, and that person with their labor turns that wood into a chair. Now that chair is worth $100, shekels, whatever. They sell that chair. Now there's $100. Now, how should that be split up? Now, see, a capitalist would say, what's the least amount I can give to this person for their labor in this system? And that's what I will do. A socialist would say, well, I mean, it was nothing until my labor made it into something. So I'll tell you what, since you had it, I'll be generous and split it with you 50-50. What do you think? That sounds like, but in reality, Jeff Bezos is still a billionaire if that's the system, right? So that's all we're talking about is like, let's put the value in society on labor, on work, on the thing that turns raw stuff into goods. That's where the value is versus the people who just had enough resources and thought first to hoard all this stuff, right? And then we should reward you for clearing the forest and sitting like, no. It's like we need to reorganize what is valuable. And especially since we're on, like you're talking about, this artificial system where you have to work for money and then like the money, people decide whether or not that's going to buy enough bread. No, we need to value the person sweating who's turning nothing into something, right? Like that person needs to be okay no matter what happens.
Yeah, and I think you see this a lot in food, the discussion of unskilled labor and how saying something is unskilled labor, I think is capitalist propaganda because we're saying, oh, that's unskilled, ergo we don't have to pay that person anything.
Bing! Also, unskilled labor. Yo, let me toss this on for size. Having joints and a heart and the muscles and lungs to lift this shit up heavy with my body, that's a skill, right?
Yes.
And if it weren't a skill, like you'd be doing it by yourself, but you need people. So you know what I mean? Like, miss me with that bullshit. Like, I like you, unskilled labor, that is a capitalist talking point. Like, that's code for I don't respect what you do.
Yes.
I don't respect your labor right now, so you get nothing.
Yeah.
That's preposterous, right? Like, it's a feature, not a bug. That's the other thing, right? It's designed to reward those with capital instead of laborers. You know what I mean? That's what we've been doing the last 100 years is like taking the balance from the people making the things and to the person sitting in that like high office counting the money. Like, and it's worse than it ever was, and it's only getting worse. I mean, it's not good for them, right? Because like it's like look what happened in France. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying we're like on guillotine levels yet, but this story does not end well, right? Jeff Bezos is a trillionaire, and most cities in America now look like Los Angeles with 50, 60,000 people sleeping on the street. I think America has a major problem, right? And it's not from outside terrorists, not from inside terrorists. It's from what's this deal that we have here? And why should I participate? You know what I mean? Like that's dangerous. It doesn't have to be that way. We can fix it.
I don't know. If Trump had won, I would think that the guillotines were just around the corner because if you look at Etsy, if you just search guillotine on Etsy, there are dozens and dozens of pages of guillotine-themed jewelry available.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So file that under a canary in the coal mine, right?
Exactly.
Like, okay. So beheading becomes like a fashion item, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just in the air. Just something we talk about, you know what I mean? Off with their heads, you know.
Yeah. It's just something I liked, so I bought it. Okay, so the story of Breadlines, I think it actually is extremely American, continuing up into this day. Okay, so I don't know if you were one of the people who got into baking the way so many of us did during quarantine, but do you know the Fleischmann's Yeast Company?
I do.
Okay, so you can buy little packets of yeast, and they were the first people, Mr. Fleischmann was the first one and his brothers, to figure out a way that people could get active yeast at home in little packets. So you only have to use one at a time, you know, to make your bread products. So that was Mr. Fleischmann. He moved to New York around the 1860s or so. No, first to Cincinnati and then to New York. And then as a way of advertising his yeast packets, he started his Vienna model bakeries. And by Vienna model, he meant we make everything in-house. Start to finish, every product you see was made in here. And yes, it was a good bakery, but it was so to advertise the dry yeast packets.
Right.
So that seems like a very American innovation. But then he started noticing around the 1890s how many people were starving. And he decided that he would give out bread that he had. So during the summer months, people could come get half a loaf of bread. He would open the bakery gates or whatever, you know, in the middle of the night or something, give everyone half a loaf of bread. And in the winter, also a cup of coffee.
Nice.
And so people started talking about this Fleischmann bread line. Also, I just want to note that apparently it was considered unseemly for women to join the Breadlines. That's why whenever you see old photographs of them, it's all men in them. And it also speaks to how women starve more because they're not allowed to get charity. Extremely infuriating.
Right. Well, there should be a man in their life who's providing for that household. And if there's no man in your life, well, madam, you should just starve to death with dignity, please.
Exactly. So even though they were giving out tons of bread, the Fleischmanns became wildly wealthy, outrageously wealthy. This to me, I mean, I don't know how much train cars actually cost, but by the 1880s, Mr. Fleischmann's son was living in Santa Barbara, California, but technically still employed by the Fleischmann Company. So when he had to go back to New York, he would take his private train car cross-country back and forth at his disposal whenever he wanted. That's crazy.
Pullman status.
Yeah.
Private car. Oh, yeah. That is wild.
So wealthy. Now, I said it was so American to me because it doesn't end there. Fleischmann's maybe great-granddaughter is Elizabeth Holmes, founder of Theranos.
Are you telling me homegirl was born on third base and is insisting that she hit a triple? Is that what we're dealing with here?
This is what I'm telling you about. So when I found that out, I had this thought in my head. I was like, well, okay, first, actually, so I started Googling immediately when I found this out. And I was like, okay, maybe this is they're like the symbol of how inherited wealth is bad. Like you can't just have generational wealth because this is what it ends with. And I Googled, and I found out that there is an entire essay about this very thing, about how they prove that generational wealth is bad, written by Family Business Magazine.
Wow.
Which exists, but was definitely writing this as a cautionary tale, being like, great, you started a family business. Don't just give it to your idiot kids. They will fuck it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
I thought that was amazing. And then I kept Googling, and it turns out that people who have watched the documentaries and listened to the podcasts and whatever probably already know this, but a lot of her investors and her initial board were like, hey, her grandpa invented Fleischmann's, became a millionaire overnight. She's got to have it in her. This is genetic. Literally said that.
So her board, I watched the podcasts, all that. One of the things was it was all these incredibly old, incredibly white, incredibly powerful men. We're talking like secretaries of state, like motherfuckers in the White House, like the upper echelon, American aristocracy. Were like, sure, and like these closed door meetings, and like the doc didn't get into this. And I'm sitting with my wife. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? This like bedhead, like weird voice psycho in this turtleneck, right? Is like kind of conning, but I guess not conning because she's just straight up telling them like, I can do magic, give me millions of dollars. But now I realize it's, oh, the Fleischman kid. Oh, she's got a thing going. Like the way that like I might be selling papers door to door in my level, at that level, right? It's like a Fleischman talking to like the son of a Rockefeller or like a Kennedy, and they're just pushing millions around like, oh, she's a good kid. Wow. Yeah. I did not know that.
I know. It's amazing. And then knowing that these guys were like, oh, it's genetic, it's in her blood to make a ton of money out of nowhere. You know, that could really go either way. For instance, Elizabeth Holmes' great uncle, also a Holmes, he moved to Hawaii, bought his own island, owned plantations there, so problematic from the start. Would do stuff like take his boats out in the middle of the night while wearing a skirt, which I think just like paints a picture. You know, the wearing a skirt in and of itself would not be insane, but while doing it on a speedboat with no lights on in the middle of the night, yeah, that's insane for sure.
Okay, so he's like a plantation owner, which is what it sounds like, right? Yes. We're talking about like slavery 100 years later, where it's not slavery. They just are very motivated to work for me, and I will cut their hands off if they stop. But it's not slavery. Okay, right.
Yeah. He ended up committing suicide because his neurological problems were just too much for him to deal with. And it's like, that's genetic too, you know?
It is. And that's a scenario where I feel like you are, it's like your gilded cage, right? Because you're so wealthy and inoculated from society, they're going to let you wild out. Whereas like a regular person, you might get checked early on in your life. Like, hey, we need you at a 2, you're at a 7. And if you keep wilding out, they might be like, hey, we need to go talk to someone, and you cannot come back until you do. He didn't, it sounds like, get that sort of, I don't know, care.
I know.
Like, he's got enough money, he's fine. If he's a little wacky, let him do what he wants.
Yeah, no, an average person, if your dad buys you one speedboat and you take it out at night, they're like, no. But with the Fleischmans, it was like, have a couple more. I mean.
Right.
Exactly. So, I mean, America, right? USA.
Oh my gosh. And that's the other thing, like you're talking about like socialism, how everyone misunderstands it. There is socialism in this country, right? The military famously has it. Like I grew up as a military kid, you know, single payer healthcare, single payer anything, like all of it, big bulk. The military is operating as one big unit. And so we're getting everything at a discount. You know, where we are in the world, there's like a mock-up of a base identical everywhere, all powered by socialism, right? We're all in this together. Rich people get it. Right? You know what I mean? You run a business in America, like all kinds of wild taxes. You're drilling for oil. They'll rush you a check just for the pleasure of doing it for some reason. The only people that don't get socialism is us.
Yeah.
Right? Like Trump and co passed a $2 trillion tax cut for people who are Fleischman types, right? That's socialism, right? Yeah. So it's like socialism is good for everyone, but like the people who need it in this country, which is so strange to me, right? It's like, oh, it'll trickle down, trickle in economics. What is that? That is socialism for people who don't need it. You know what I mean? Like we've been doing this since like the 60s or 70s. So I'm just saying, let's turn that light towards working people, right? Like, let's just like crane that like little giveaway bag that currently is going towards, you know, ExxonMobil and give it to like John Q. I work a job down the street, you know, and unpopular opinion, but you know, we hope to block by block
make it popular.
Yeah, change hearts, change minds.
Well, so the Protestant work ethic thing is why people think that they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires, and it also makes American philanthropy extremely punitive. When the Breadlines, when philanthropists, like official ones, not accidental ones like Mr. Fleischman, when official ones started enacting Breadlines too, it's the thing that we still talk about today with the stimulus. They wanted to make sure that no one who didn't deserve it didn't get any bread. So they only gave it out at night. The theory being that only someone who's desperate enough to come out in the middle of the night and get it really needs it.
This is some bullshit that comes from the Bible. If you don't work, you don't eat. And
Yes.
it sounds like an aphorism, it sounds like a proverb, but these people believe it, which means if you are not sweating, you deserve to die from starvation. And that's animates their politics. It animates how they move, who they vote for, how they talk about people who are unhoused or out of work. There's a contempt for people who are poor in this country because it's like it's a moral failure not to be spending, not to be guapped up. That is insane to me, right? But like it's a grift that keeps working. You know what I mean? Like I've got two, so everyone's got one. Fuck them. Like what? We're all down here scurrying for crumbs. Like what are we doing?
It's just a complete lack of empathy. I know that when my stepbrother died in this summer, he was homeless. And that's when it really crystallized for me that people who are disdainful of homelessness, it's like, hey, you know what? Let me come over and tell you about his childhood. And like, tell me afterwards if you still have no empathy for him. Because if you do, you need to go to jail.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry to hear about your stepbrother. That's terrible. But what you're describing as the response that people have to homelessness and to people being unhoused and people just being like in poverty, you're right. It's like, it goes back to this, we're talking about this breadline stuff. It's a moral issue, right? Like, oh, if you, a strong American works, and if you're not working, it's because you're lazy, and lazy is a sin, and Christ says, da, da, da. And okay, once you start moving out of circumstances and into like right and wrong, that's when people get hurt. And that's when people know that people are suffering and they don't care because, well, it's not the right thing to do, or they're living wrong. So, you know, those are the consequences. You know what I mean? Like it's cover, right? Ethical, moral cover.
Yeah. And, you know, so during the Depression, Hoover has a terrible reputation for the way that he dealt with it. You know, the shanty towns were called Hoovervilles, all this kind of stuff. But reading more about it, I almost wondered if he was like, I don't know. I didn't bother looking into what his stated religion was, but I was like, does he have that old time religion? Does he believe in the goodness of people? Because part of the reason that he took so long to react to the Depression is because he thought that philanthropists were going to help out their fellow man. He genuinely thought that.
This is a dumbass Republican talking point that's over 100 years old, apparently, which is like, well, there's no place for the state. The church will step in. Philanthropy will step in. It's like, okay, great. So we're going to hope that local groups, based out of the charity of their heart, choose people and save them from death or injury because they want, like, that's your plan? What?
Yeah.
Really? Like it's and that's another thing. Like it's like you're talking about, like it's means tested, it's selective, right? That lets me redline stuff. That lets me say trans Black women, go fuck yourself, while also saying we have a stimulus package designed for everyone. Is it designed for everyone? Is it? Or did you make some hoops that I have to jump through? Right?
Yeah.
Is that what's going on? Like it's like every homeless person, unhoused person in Los Angeles is owed stimulus money. And so there's all kinds of lefty groups that are like trying to get these people organized and like let them know that like, hey, it may be tough, maybe pain in the ass, but we're like a couple 1040s away from you getting straight up checks that you are owed. That money is yours and it's sitting on a shelf and they don't want you to get it. And people like those barriers. They're not unintentional. It is designed to prevent people from accessing those government services because, you know, oh, the people who deserve it, like the people who deserve, right, that help is such a narrow, right? Like what does that person look like? You know what I mean? Like,
it's ridiculous. So during the Depression, conservatives said that giving out food was making able men soft. It's like, this will make them soft if you give them food. Even the people whose hearts were in the right place, the Breadlines themselves, they were like, we didn't mean to do this forever. We thought this was like a 6-month dip. Like this is, we can't do this. We can't do this. Hoover repeatedly asked the Red Cross to do direct relief. Specifically, he asked them to do it in Appalachia. And they were like, no. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company wrote as its official policy that as a people, we, United Statesians, are given normally to overfeeding. We would not be surprised if under the present conditions of enforced moderation, many have enjoyed better health than ever before.
Yo, from the desk of Mr. Monopoly himself. I always thought these citizens could use a diet.
Yep.
A little bit of hunger is good for the soul and the waistline. Let them starve.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. This is like if Monty Burns was an actual person, I think I've discovered him.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a way that this permanently affected the way that we eat in the United States is that, this move towards scientific everything had already started before the Depression. But now, I suppose the more progressive people in charge, members of the government, they were like, well, okay, we actually need to do something. We need to think about nutrition and how to feed people. We need to think about how to feed children. Home home economists, I always do that. I'm a huge fan of home economics and I don't know how to pronounce it. They actually started getting more work, which, yay, I'm glad for women getting more work. But because of the prevailing attitudes of the time, I don't know if it's a net gain. More children got fed. They started thinking about school lunches and making sure that people got enough vitamins and minerals. This is also a new idea. So this is good. But the attitude was food is not for fun. No, 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 no. Food is fuel.
Right.
And this is like where we get this idea. They invented a character who we never see anymore. She was named Aunt Sammy. The lady feminine counterpart to Uncle Sam.
Okay.
She was the one who talked about domestic issues. I don't mean within the United States. I mean within the home.
Yeah.
And there's this phrase they came up with called flavor satisfaction, which essentially meant enjoying your food. And they were like, don't do that. Flavor satisfaction. Come on. That's not even an issue. We're talking about vitamins and minerals here.
What kind of Babette's feast? Like, you know what I mean? Like Amish, I will not crack a smile. I don't enjoy this meal. It's for food only. Like what kind?
Yeah.
And see, I bet that was don't worry about flavor satisfaction when you're getting your nutrients and minerals and vitamins, you working poor pieces of shit. In other news, unrelated, we've got a new flavor of caviar that discovered by the Rockefeller Group, and it's available only at the Explorers Club in Manhattan. We'd love to see you down there. You know what I mean? We've got champagne straight from France, having a great time. And back to nutrition news. You should be eating gruel and be happy that you can fit into your pants.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and this leads to a whole other thing that I wasn't even planning talking about. I have to do an episode just about this, but I will mention that this idea of American food and the idea that white people food is bland. Well, that one, I'm not going to say entirely, largely. The idea entirely of American food comes from this era and the institutionalization of school lunches, because school lunches were at first a private enterprise, and the women doing them were like, they were in, this sounds like a joke, but they were literally in New York City, and in the Italian neighborhoods, they were like, okay, give the kids Italian food. In the Jewish neighborhoods, it was give them Jewish food, Ashkenazi food. In the Irish neighborhoods, it was give them Irish food. They literally like, what do these little ethnic kids like? And then when the government was like, oh, actually, stop doing that privately, we're going to do it. As the government, they hired the anthropologist Margaret Mead to design the menus for school lunches. And she decided, make sure the kids don't feel weird about being immigrants, universalize school lunches, serve everyone the same thing, and do it as bland as possible so that everyone, quote unquote, likes it.
Not too spicy.
Exactly.
Ooh, it's sour. What's that? Like, wow.
Yeah.
So this is
design. Where that comes from. Yes, but it's so weird being a person who's on Twitter too much, because some years everyone's like, that Margaret Mead was the most racist person in the history. This is what she did to the Samoans, to the blah, 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 blah. But then other years, it's like, that Margaret Mead, she was blazing the path for women. She, and it totally goes back and forth. And I don't know if her heart was in the right place.
Right.
It could be argued that it was. These were people who were afraid of garlic.
Oh, 100%. Right. We're talking like exotic foods at the time, like cilantro, right? You can read like LA Times articles from like 1920 something. And it's like the exotic food product known as avocado and cilantro is being offered at the Spanish Kitchen downtown near Olivera Street. Like, look out. You know what I mean? Like so I get it. Like flatten it, homogenize it.
Yes.
We would say forced assimilation and like cultural, like annihilation, but and sure, in their mind, it's like, oh, we're fitting in, right? There is such a thing as American culture. There is such a thing as an American ethnicity. And it's just white people who ignore and don't talk about where they're from or ignore their grandparents and speak only English at home. Like, I think the flattening of all that is a mistake, and that multiculturalism is not color blindness, right? It's recognizing that we are all different, knowing those differences, calling them out, making space for them, and letting people do what they want to do, right? Assimilation shouldn't be, like Eddie Wong as a kid, make fun of you for your stinky Chinese lunch. It should be, hey, every lunch is cool here, right? Yes. And so like from all over the place, it's all cool and we're open to anything because we're America, and in America, anything goes. Isn't that fun? Like, wow, we're all in here together. And I think we're kind of there now, but to your point, I think we are still suffering the effects of Margaret Mead and the assimilation stage of the early 20th century, where it's like, we're going to flatten this thing out until it's smooth and white and America, and that's it. Yeah. No questions.
And also, it was always a lie. I talked to this ancient man who runs a greengrocer in Malibu. I think it's called John's of Malibu. I talked to him like 10 years ago. I don't know if he's still with us, but he grew up in a family of greengrocers in Pennsylvania. And he said that they hid the garlic behind the counter so that when people wanted to buy it, they wouldn't suffer the humiliation of putting it in their basket in front of God and everybody. They just go up to the counter and be like, yeah, and add a little garlic in there too. So people still wanted garlic. It was just embarrassing to admit to that.
It's like a steerage flavor, like lower class.
Yes.
Wow.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Hey, let's talk about quark, specifically the cultured dairy product called quark. It's very creamy, it's not tart at all, it's high in protein and low in lactose, and quark is a staple in European and Central Asian diets. It's technically a soft cheese because it's made with a blend of cheese and buttermilk cultures, but quark more closely resembles like a thick yogurt. I personally eat it like yogurt, usually for breakfast or a snack, but you can also use it like sour cream, cottage cheese, creme fraiche, things like that in either sweet or savory recipes, cold or hot. A brand called Wunder has been pioneering quark in the US, and they make it in rural western Pennsylvania using milk only from cows raised on small dairy farms. So if you'd like to try some Wunder quark, go to Wunder Creamery. That is like wonder, but with a U. Wunder Creamery, and enter code SMARTMOUTH, one word, for a 15% off discount on your first order. That's wundercreamery.com. Use code SMARTMOUTH. I think also a thing that I hadn't considered, so of course I agree that it's easy to forget this. Truly, before the Great Depression, there was no government safety net. There just wasn't in America. And, gosh, this gets into issue of like media and bias and stuff like that. And again, we see pictures specifically of Breadlines, but I think that in America, we don't see the pictures of people sitting on a chair on a sidewalk with literally nowhere to go. They've been kicked out of their home. They have nothing. There's no place for them to go. There's nothing for them to do. And this was a thing that was happening during the Depression.
Yeah.
No social security.
Those Dust Bowl photos, right? All that campaign, I think, changed a lot of Americans' minds back then. Like the idea of mothers with their children sitting around outside starving to death because there's no work, right? Their husband's out riding the rails looking for a paycheck somewhere. And it's like those images coming in. We're like, well, maybe we ought to do something, right? Like I don't know. It's people, yeah, right. The image of the American West and like working hard and all that, it's always like a pioneer with his rifle and like a fur, but there must have been people starving to death, right? Like,
yeah,
madness.
Yeah. Okay, Breadlines started in the 1890s, and then you don't really hear about them again until the Depression. But the argument can be made that it's because Breadlines were so common and continuous from the 1890s through the 1930s that they stopped being something that the media covered. And you will sometimes see reference to them in literature from the era, but they're never explained, which this has precedence. You think of something as being remarkable, but if you look at the literature and you see that it's mentioned in passing, you know that this is just standard.
Yes.
There's no point in talking about it.
Right. Yeah. Like this entire history is just, it's illuminating and I'm enjoying it, but at the same time, it's like when you read, man, America makes the same fucking mistake again and again and again. And like, I'd like to take a lesson from it, but really I'm just hearing like, yeah, it's the same song, different
Yeah.
remix.
Yeah, it is. I would also argue that post-depression, you're like, okay, Breadlines depression, World War II, oh, that's everyone, has a car in their garage and a barbecue in the backyard. But charity got a lot more organized during and after the Depression, and we still have soup kitchens and food banks. And this sounds so dumb, but I've convinced myself that I'm right. Soup kitchens and food banks are indoors as opposed to Breadlines being outdoors. So we don't see that. So we literally don't think about how people are still starving in America and need help getting food. It's so basic, and that's why I think I must be right.
No, I think that is a point. Also, I think that, talking about Fred Hampton before this call started, I think the Black Panther program with free breakfast, and now that a majority of America's kids who are hungry, the one meal they can count on is that thing they're getting at their school. You're right. A lot of that is kind of baked in institutionally. And so it's not front of mind. You're not seeing it. Right. And so those numbers, well, they're probably pretty alarming, right? People who are food insecure in this country, I bet it's 1 in 5 or maybe 1 in 10 at the low end, but it's out of sight, out of mind, to your point.
Yes. And so I was thinking about how the 90s are thought of as a time of economic growth in the United States. So there's this article that was written for the Chicago Tribune in 1994 that said that 26 million Americans that year had to get free food. And the demand for free food in 1994 was so high that the donations that the food banks were getting were 15% less what they needed to feed everyone who was coming to the food banks. It also said, it pointed out that people think of food pantries and such being for men who temporarily don't have a job, but that 4 out of every 10 recipients of food bank food are children under 10 years old. And that among families who get food, almost half of them have a working adult in the family.
Oh, yeah.
So we are, in fact, talking about the working poor who need to go to food banks. And then this interesting point, I thought, was that America, as a country, including industry and private donations, donated in 1994 about 700 million pounds of food just through the organization's Second Harvest. So that's just one charity, 700 million pounds of food a year. The president of Second Harvest made the note, though, that as America becomes more efficient, that means less excess food. You'll note that it doesn't mean more people are getting jobs, more people are getting richer, and so they need less food at these food banks. It just means that there's less available donations because we're making less food because we're more, quote, efficient.
Wow. Yeah, that is not great.
Yeah. And then I started thinking, like, in the United States, what are some things that we have to line up for? Healthcare. Literally, traveling clinics always get a line 12 hours deep of people who've drone for 3 hours away to have their teeth checked out.
Oh, ears checked, eyes checked, right? Like all that. You think of that shit as like Appalachian stuff from the 30s, but let some RV roll up to any major American city and be like, we're checking ears. That's a day, right?
Yeah.
You're standing in that line. 110%. Like some things should be a free and every American should have some of it. But like food and healthcare are not listed among them. Like that is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think, so I do think that because of the pandemic, maybe the average American is more aware of how delicate the supply chain is in the United States, because I think most people, when they saw the photos of empty grocery store shelves and someone had written on it, "This is what you'll get in Biden's America," meaning socialist. No, these pictures were taken in Trump's America. You understand that, right? You took this actual picture in Trump's America. I do think most thinking people realize the disconnect there. So I do think that probably we're more aware of the fact that it's not lack of food, because we were all immediately told it's not lack of food, it's supply issues. Or
Definitely.
not supply issues. It's not the lack of food, it's the supply chain issues.
Yes. I read the same thing, which is like America does not have a food shortage. America has a getting food onto the shelves problem.
Yes.
And, oh well.
Yeah. And it was partly because, they're so used to selling mostly to restaurants that all the mayonnaise factories only have 10-gallon jugs. So they don't have any more glass jars.
This whole thing runs smoothly unless one small thing comes along and disrupts it. And then we have no alternative plans. And oh, well, we'll just see. Then you're on Uber Eats getting your toilet paper and oat milk, right? Like at 80,000% markup because Vons can't work with people to keep stuff on the shelves, which is wonderful.
So we probably won't know for a long time if this pandemic caused an official famine by the official metrics that are set up. But it is interesting to sort of look back, thinking about our issues not being lack of food and then other countries' famines, were they lack of food? Okay, so I think one of the most famous famines in the world was the early 1930s famine in Ukraine under Stalin's rule, known as Holodomor.
Oh, okay, I've heard that.
The words are a combo of starvation and to inflict death in Ukrainian. The estimations for how many people died in this famine are so diverse that I'm not even going to try and guess. It is considered one of the worst in the history. It could plausibly be argued that this specifically happened because Stalin was fed up with the Ukrainians. Ukrainians have always been wild and out. They've throughout history been like, we're our own people. We're going to do what we want. Fuck with us at your own risk. The problem is that the USSR had gotten too powerful. Stalin had gotten too powerful. And Lenin had set up this system of, within the peasantry, it was okay if some peasants were more like middle class and not starving. And then Stalin came to power and he was like, no, I want everyone to starve. Obviously, I'm editorializing, but the more I read about Stalin, the more I think he was clinically insane. Really and truly. Sure. And then you combine that with, I think he was stupid. His daughter said that he was stupid, and I'm willing to believe her. So I think he was a vicious, stupid, insane person.
Vicious, stupid, and powerful.
Yes. Yes, bad exactly. Combo. So he didn't like it that the Ukrainian peasants had a little cash and had successful harvests. And he didn't like it that they were like, maybe we want to be our own republic. Like, we kind of want to do our own thing that's like a little different than Stalinism. Well, clearly he couldn't have that. So he just set up this system where you had to give all of your grain, all of your crops to the government. You couldn't keep any for your family to eat. You had to give it all away. And if you did not meet his quota, you would be executed. This is absolutely true.
Damn, this sounds like a bad version of what Mao did with his community planned farm scenario, right? Like,
this is what I think. I don't know. You just read about these famines that happen and you're like, this is what happens when one man has absolute power. And maybe there's an argument to be made that a person who wants absolute power is mentally ill. Not that all mentally ill people want power, but a person who wants power and is mentally ill, that's a dangerous combination.
Very, very dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm loving this idea that famine is a political act and not a natural disaster,
Quote, this one was a hybrid of a famine caused by calamitous social economic policies and aimed at a particular population for repression or punishment. He wanted them to die.
I'm going to go ahead and say that sounds to me like Hurricane Katrina. A lot of people think that Hurricane Katrina was a natural disaster, that just rain fell and killed all these people. That is not what happened. The levees down there, built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, were like not how they should have been. And I'm not going to say why, but I will say a lot of black people live there. And so this hurricane comes, flood comes, and what happens? The levees break. And that's what does it, right? So history is going to say a bad storm came. Very tiny fine print. Oh, public mismanagement, right? Like political malfeasance, right? Like people not giving a shit about who lived here is what caused this. And now I'm hearing the same thing with this famine business, right? It's like, oh yeah, sure, there was a bad winter. Okay. But is that what happened? It's like, oh yeah, that, and somebody was like, fuck them. They get no food, you know?
Yeah, but here's the thing. There wasn't a bad winter. Even. Like,
right.
Not even.
Right.
They literally had their food taken away from them.
Wow. Engineered.
Yes. Yes.
Engineered starvation. New definition for famine.
Yeah. Okay, here's something else that's interesting. It is only very recent, like within the last 40 years, that the people who study this sort of thing even began to consider that Africa was an area prone to famine. I think that we grew up watching all those commercials about sponsor a child for 13 cents a day or whatever it was, and we think, and I think anyone who was paying attention in the 80s thinks that Africa is where the famines happen.
Mm-hmm.
We think that because the Ethiopian famine of the early 1980s got a lot of media attention. And then the celebrities decided to do Band-Aid. This is why. This is it. That's why. That's it. That's why we think Africa stars more than other continents.
Branding. It's like a Save the Whales moment, right? Like
according to one study, from 1870 to 2010, 87% of deaths from famine occurred in Asia and Eastern Europe. And it's not that 13% occurred in Africa, only 9.2% occurred in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Eastern Europe and East Asia. Sounds like strong men and famine kind of run in a pack.
Yeah. So, okay. There was a famine in Rwanda when Belgium acquisitioned their grain.
Those motherfuckers. God damn. That you want to talk about a Holocaust nobody talks about. Like
I know. Belgium was wild. Eritrean famine that continued all the way down to South Africa. This happened because Italy took over Ethiopia and Eritrea. They wanted to bring the cows they were used to working with to that area, so they brought cows from India through Italy down to Eritrea. The Indian cows brought a disease that African animals were not used to. All the cows died. A bunch of the native animals died. Ergo, there was a famine. There's nothing more capitalist than Europeans bringing an Asian thing to Africa and then being like, whoops.
Right, exactly. Damn, y'all shit is fucked up. Bye. Oh, thanks.
Generally speaking, a lot of African countries are no longer self-sufficient because of colonialism.
Right.
So when one thing goes wrong, it all goes wrong now. Also, we mentioned earlier, the idea that Ethiopians starve a lot comes from media coverage in the 1880s, specifically because a feeding center had been set up. And so there was one place for foreign media to go to get their footage.
A junket, essentially.
Yes.
A starvation junket. Right?
Yes.
Like photo
and it
op.
was a breadline. So I don't know what my point is, but I know that there's something deep there. Moving back to Russia and this idea that in a communist country, specifically Russia, people are always starving, and what we're learning about supply chains. So one of the reasons why lines at supermarkets in the Soviet Union were so long is because different products you had to stand in different lines for. So you had to go stand in line for meat, and then you had to go to the back of the vegetable line. And then you finally made your way through that, and then you had to go to the back of the dairy line.
Okay.
Which is stupid, but it's different than starving. You know what I mean?
Yeah. We're right. There's not a run on this place. It's just wildly inefficient.
Yes.
To check out, and probably wildly inefficient because there is no capitalist behind this business who's like, why are my cashiers taking so long? We need to get this place whipped up into fashion, make more money. It's like, hey man, I get paid the same whether or not they stand in line or not. So guess what? Lights are on, shelves are stocked. I don't know what we're talking about. You know what I mean? This shit is rolling. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. And then I read this article that was obviously written prior to the pandemic that specifically talked about toilet paper and how toilet paper in the Soviet Union started becoming a thing in the 1950s, and then everybody wanted the toilet paper, and then they didn't have enough, and people, knowing that there wouldn't be a lot of toilet paper in the store, would buy as much toilet paper as they possibly could, and it was sold in individual rolls back then, so they would bring a string or a rope with them and tie the toilet paper to that, or around that, and then wear it as a necklace home. And I was just like, man, panic about toilet paper. Maybe this is like the thread of modern society. Just freaking out about TP.
I mean, some modern convenience that we lived without for thousands of years, and all of a sudden we get it for a couple of decades, then it's gone. Oh no!
Yeah. God, I actually, this is not about any particular social system, but I was thinking about how Americans are so disdainful of, say, Italians and saying they're dirty because they don't wear deodorant, essentially, and they have body odors, whereas we Americans are the ones who go around not washing after we have a bowel movement. Who's dirty?
This is something that is a great scandal, because I heard, and I get a lot of Americans here, they're like, oh, like people from like Arabs don't wipe their ass. People from the Middle East don't wipe their ass. They don't wipe their ass. They don't wipe their ass. It's like, guess what? I stopped wiping my ass last year. Do you know why? Because I got a bidet. I'm now like every Arab. I'm now like the entire Middle East, parts of Europe, right? Like the rest of the civilized fucking world. When I'm done shitting, I power wash my asshole, right? So like I don't have any wiping to do. That's how they've been living since like the 6th century, right? And like, but over here it's, oh, they don't wipe their ass. They don't wipe their ass. It's like, flip it. People who wipe their ass are fucking Neanderthals, right? That's what's going on. But like, I didn't hear that and know that until like I was watching Hassan Minhaj's show like last year or two, and he was like, yeah, we don't have toilet paper and all that. Do you know why? Because we have this thing, which is a bidet, and we use it after every time we go to the bathroom to wash ourselves down there. So the concept that you would like use rags to wipe what? Like,
yeah, it's nasty.
Yeah. And so I can see how from that side, looking at us, it's like, yeah, man, they got the internet, they invented Facebook, but you can't tell me they don't know what they're doing. Fuck that. Like, these guys out here wiping their asses with their hands. Fuck that. Like, nah. You know what I mean? Like, it's, so yeah, that's, on TikTok, there's a lot of that, right? Where it's like, you're calling me dirty, but you put your hand in your asshole.
Oh my God, Jeremy.
Ding, dong, dong, dong. Like, what? Now, hey, get on my level. Like, yeah, that's in every bathroom, in every home, even in huts, they've got a special jar pitcher thing with a weird spout designed for that, and they've been doing it since the dawn of fucking time because it makes sense. But here we are thinking that TP is the way to go.
I know. Which, we're so weird. We're so gross. So when you read about, I'm so sorry to all my listeners who came here to hear about delicious foods and had to sit through that.
Apologies for the bidet realness.
So, kind of what we were talking about before, the articles when you read about like why there are shortages in Russia, and it's always about all the rules that they have. For instance, in the 1980s and 90s, one of the things, in this quest to stay communist, they're like, well, we don't want anyone to feel judged for buying old bread that's, marked down like day old bread. So we just throw it out. So there's one thing. Okay. They'll throw out day old instead of selling it for half off. They also, if you are a store owner and you order bread and then at the end of the day you have leftover loaves, you have to send them back to the factory and you will get financially punished for it. So bakery owners purposefully underorder so that there's nothing to send back to the factory at the end of the day. Yes.
They're incentivized to have low supply and run out.
Yeah, exactly. Also, the government owns the trucks, and so they don't have an unlimited supply of trucks. They have trucks doing, 100 deliveries a day, each truck, or something like that. So unlike in an American restaurant where you're running out of strawberries and you call your supplier and you say, get strawberries over right now, we'll pay double, not even an option under that system. So even if you have a line of 50 people, you can't call anyone and say, hey, run some loaves over right now. Not going to happen. Also, they don't do self-service. Or maybe they do now, but in the 90s, they didn't do self-service. So you had to have someone picking out the bread for you. And then it was considered, not incorrectly, but it was considered unhygienic for it to have the bread handler be the same person as the cash handler. So those are two different interactions with salespeople that you have
Oh,
to have.
wow.
So this is just it taking a long time.
Taking forever.
Mm-hmm. So some things here. Yes, that is a communist country that this happens under. But communism is not socialism. That's one point.
Big facts.
Yeah. Also, collectivization is not required under socialism.
Yeah.
To my earlier point about men being angry that I'm a socialist who owns my own company, I don't have to share my company with anybody. I can still be a socialist and believe that I should I become successful, tax the hell out of me. That doesn't mean I have to give my company to the government. It's very different.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Also, you own a business, and if you had some employees, you probably wouldn't grind their bones into dust. You know what I mean?
Oh my God. Do you know what's funny is that I actually want to become hugely successful so that I can hire employees and give them 6 weeks vacation every year and be extremely smug about it.
Yeah,
And truly.
That's the flavor of socialism we're talking about, where it's like, oh man, I work a job and I can breathe and I feel like I have food in my shelf, and oh man, like that's all we're talking about, right? It's not like seize everything. It's when we have profits currently, all of them go to the capitalists, right, who organize that system, and then the least amount they can give to society, to the workers, to anyone who asks. That's what's going on, and that's allowed. We're saying, what if we had a democratic conversation about what to do with all the money that was made off of this enterprise, right? We're not talking about taking it all. Like 50%, I think that's some socialism, and that's not crazy. You know what I mean? Like not insane. And also, we're not talking about taking it and giving it to some king or some oligarch who's going to like drink it as champagne. We're talking about paving the roads, right? Putting shoes on feet, putting meals in bellies. Like that's it.
Yeah. Another thing is that we don't, socialism doesn't require a closed economy, and a big problem. This is going to be such a turnoff for so many people. But honestly, a big problem, I think, with Russia and China is men's egos. And part of, Stalin's thing, part of Mao's thing was like, we're an entirely self-sufficient country. We don't need nothing from nobody.
Right.
You don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You can still have international trade and be a socialist.
Definitely. It's and also there's like no star for being like, we did it all ourselves. Like, what? Yeah. Okay. Like to what end? Right? Like
no one cares. So
right. Like okay, great. Like, I mean, you probably feel great at night, but like, look at North Korea, like wonderful. Nothing's coming into that country. Well, congratulations. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
and also North Korea does rely on international charity. This is true.
Oh, sure.
Like other countries send them food. So the whole thing is ridiculous. And also something that I noticed said, it wasn't me who said it, but it was on like Reddit or something. Someone said, it is better to line up for bread than to not have money to buy bread at all, which when we're talking about breadlines and famines is in fact the issue. So you wait in line for bread a little bit, not the end of the world. But honestly, I do think that something that's forgotten when we talk about socialism in the United States is that we are allowed to learn and grow. I sound like a freaking kindergarten teacher right now, but seeing how people did what we call socialism in the 1920s doesn't mean that we have to do that the same way.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. We can, and part of this, like the democratic part of it is like, let's have that conversation. I think if you put those options in front of the American people, they're going to choose like full bellies and warm houses every single time. And okay, so maybe that means Jeff Bezos is off his trillionaire status by another 10 years. I also don't think Americans are going to be up late at night like, oh my gosh, poor Jeff, right? So let's really make it a popular democratic choice. And I think Americans would organize themselves overnight into socialist principles of dignity for everyone, and the profits made from any sort of business where goods are sold, share some of those profits with the workers who created those goods, right? Like that's all we're talking about. That is it. It's not even give me everything. It's currently the workers get what is the legal least that they can be offered. That is known, that's the American wage, right? We're talking about a system where the person who organized that system, the capitalist who got all those raw materials, and the workers who turned those raw materials into goods that were sold for tons of money, all those people are in a room, and they democratically decide, what do we do with all this cash that came in off the stuff we sold? That's it, right? Now, they're probably not going to vote to make the CEO earn 700 times what the workers earn. That's probably not going to happen in a democratic society or a democratic, setup. That's what a co-op is, right? So that's what we're advocating, is just, let's take those choices that are currently made by a very rich, powerful few and give them to the people and let the people decide how we should use these resources. And I think people would, given the option, choose to spend that money on us, on society at large.
Yeah. You know how Mackenzie Bezos got remarried?
That high school teacher.
A high school teacher? Yeah. And obviously she wouldn't have married someone who she wasn't philosophically aligned with. But the fact that he was like, yeah, we're married now and I'm ready to sit down and give away this money. I love that.
Love that. Someone sent me that and they were like, he's a high school teacher. And I was like, excuse me, asterisk, former high school teacher. And currently, you know what I mean? He's probably Googling how to give away $1 billion, right? I love that is what is happening is, our life's work is, how can we give this money away?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's got to be so offensive to all these struggling workers, you know what I mean, who are like, Trump forever, driving their $60,000 trucks like, they're taking my jobs. Okay, well, guess what? Someone who has it all is wanting to give it away, and probably people who maybe don't have things. And
yeah. Oh, she's great. I like her.
Anybody who takes the bag and then is like, guess what? I'm spending it on the people. Love it. Love to see it. Love it.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me for this propaganda-filled episode. And for anyone who's like, wait, I thought this was a food podcast. Yes, and food is political. Thank you very much.
Oh, definitely. Always. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So where can people find you on social media?
You can find me at J Bowditch. That's J, B as in boy, O-W, D as in David, I-T-C-H. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on TikTok, mostly on Twitter, mostly on Instagram. But follow me there for all, hyper local politics news, wine talk, Mexico talk, hanging out talk. But currently, how to make the city work for you.
And for anyone who lives in Los Angeles, to vote in a neighborhood election, my understanding is that you have to live there, work there, have a child who goes to school there, or have a stake in the community. Is that how they phrase it?
Yes, it's very squishy.
Some sort of vested interest. So if anyone has a vested interest in Echo Park and lives in Los Angeles, I'm not saying who to vote for. I'm just saying there are options.
Yeah, I'd like for you to educate yourself on the candidates, take a look, and then, you know what, make the choice that's right for you. I'll say that currently there are 40,000 people who live in Echo Park, and I think the record for a neighborhood council election is 115 votes, 130 votes.
Oh my God, really?
Oh, I'm going to win this election with 41 votes. I will win it with 41 votes. So that's what I'm saying.
You know you're going to win?
Only because I'm making an effort, right? I'm talking to people. I'm out here on the street, doing literally anything. 10 years ago, I had a friend who joined neighborhood council, and we were sitting in my house smoking a joint. And she was like, I'm gonna join neighborhood council. I was like, okay. She's like, should we go vote? I was like, yeah, I guess. She rounded up literally 8 of us. We walked down there. She texted people on the way. She won with 17 votes. And it was a one-day thing. But now, post 2020, post Nithya Raman, post stuff in LA, we're all kind of a little activated. So I started in January, and so I may be doing a little more than's necessary, but we would love to get that participation up. You know what I mean? Every week, someone in your neighborhood is meeting in a public forum, quote unquote, and sending a letter to the city saying the neighborhood feels this way. And if there's only 8 people on that call, is that really the neighborhood? I don't know.
Right.
So I'd like to get those numbers up in any way. Even if you don't vote for me, I'd love for you to vote. I'd love for you to participate. And the next time the city gets something on official letterhead that says from Echo Park, I'd like it to carry a little more weight than it does currently.
I love that. Well, apparently you won't need it, but good luck, Jeremy.
Thank you very much.
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower.
Hey everybody,
to
thank
the
you for listening.
sun. Brick.
This show is brought to you by Wunderquark, a dairy product that is super popular in Europe and Central Asia. It's technically a soft cheese, but quark really closely resembles a thick yogurt. You can eat it plain. I think it makes a great breakfast because it's super filling. And it's super filling because it has up to 24 grams of protein in every 8 ounces. Also, it does not separate when it gets hot, so you can use it in cooking and baking too. A brand called Wunder is bringing quark to the US. So if you would like to try it, go to wundercreamery.com and enter code SMARTMOUTH for 15% off on your first order. That's wundercreamery.com. Use code SMARTMOUTH. I used so many sources this week. They include Reuters, 4 different New York Times articles, Family Business Magazine, The New Yorker, Chewing the Fat, which is on Medium, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, The Counter, PBS, Bloomberg, History.com, Oxfam, the essay The Breadline, an American Icon of Hard Times, in the journal Studies in American Naturalism, and 2 books, A Square Meal, A Culinary History of the Great Depression, and Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine. Links to all of these sources are in the show notes and at smartmouthpodcast.com. You can join me on Instagram at smartmouthpodcast. The Patreon is at patreon.com/smartmouthpodcast, and the newsletter is at smartmouth.substack.com. Smartmouth is a production of Table Cakes, a woman-owned, Los Angeles-based podcast company. Smartmouth is hosted and produced by me, Catherine Spires, and engineered by Mika Grimm. Check out all of our shows at tablecakes.com.
A Table Cakes production.